Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because, well, we're looking at a story that literally redefined the whole landscape of matrimonial law in India. It's this landmark Supreme Court case from 1975, NG Dastane v. S. Dastane. Now I know, legal precedents can sometimes feel, a bit dry, but I promise you, this one, it is anything but. It's got drama, it's got conflict, and a massive plot twist that totally changed how courts look at marriage, cruelty, and forgiveness. Just think about this scenario for a second. Imagine you're in court, right? You're fighting this bitter matrimonial battle. You lay out all your evidence, and the highest court in the land looks at it and says, yes, you are absolutely right. Your spouse is cruel to you, point proven. But then the judge bangs the gavel and says, however, you still lose. Wait, how is that even possible? How can you successfully prove your partner was cruel, but still have your whole petition for divorce thrown out? Well, that is the exact paradox at the heart of this fascinating case.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to break this explainer down into 3 parts. Part 1 of the case, brief facts. Part 2 of the case, the judgment. And Part 3 of the case, important principles.
All right, starting off with Part 1 of the case, brief facts.
So, our story begins way back in the mid-1950s. Dr. Narayan Ganesh Dastane married Sucheta Dastane in 1956 according to Hindu rites. But unfortunately, things, they just didn't stay harmonious for long. In the years immediately following the wedding, these really serious, deep-rooted disputes started popping up between the couple, and the conflict just kept escalating. It escalated so much that it triggered this massive legal battle that dragged on for nearly 2 decades, bouncing between all these different lower courts until it finally landed on the desks of the Supreme Court of India in 1975. So what actually went wrong? Well, Dr. Dastane, the husband, came to the court with some extremely severe allegations against his wife. He claimed she was mentally unstable. Plus, he alleged that her family had actively concealed this mental condition from him before they even got married. And finally, he stated that she treated him with outright cruelty, detailing behavior that he described as abusive and aggressive. Now, just to be clear, we're simply looking at the claims he presented to the court right now. This was basically the entire foundation of his legal argument. Based on those very serious allegations, Dr. Dastane filed a petition seeking relief under the Hindu Marriage Act. And honestly, he basically threw the entire legal playbook at the situation. He asked the court for 3 distinct possible remedies. First, an annulment of the marriage, arguing fraud because of the alleged concealment of her mental state. Second, a divorce on the ground of unsoundness of mind. And third, if those first 2 didn't work out, he requested a judicial separation on the ground of cruelty. He was, for sure, leaving absolutely no stone unturned here. Okay, now for the climax of our story. Let's move to Part 2 of the case, the judgment. After reviewing all this evidence, the Supreme Court actually made a definitive ruling on one of Dr. Dastane's core claims. They stated, quite clearly, that yes, the wife's conduct did in fact amount to mental cruelty under the Hindu Marriage Act. Now, if you were sitting in the courtroom at this exact moment, you'd probably think, well, there it is. The husband just won his case for judicial separation. He proved the cruelty, right? But the judges weren't quite finished talking. And this brilliantly illustrates the genius of the legal system. See, the court doesn't just look at one side of the equation. They look at the whole picture. Yes, on one side we have the wife's conduct, which the court agreed was mental cruelty. But what about the other side? What about the husband's conduct during and after this cruelty actually happened? This is where the court introduced a really vital legal concept called condonation. So how exactly did the husband's actions amount to condonation? Well, in plain English, condonation basically just means forgiveness through action. The Supreme Court pointed right at the evidence. Dr. Dastane continued to live under the same roof with his wife. And even more importantly, he maintained normal marital relations with her long after these alleged acts of cruelty had taken place. The court reasoned that by just acting normally and continuing the marriage in a physical and domestic sense, he had implicitly forgiven her past behavior. And that brings us to the ultimate twist of the case. The Supreme Court entirely dismissed the husband's claim for judicial separation and divorce. And the logic? It's actually remarkably straightforward when you think about it. Because he condoned or legally forgave the behavior by maintaining a normal marital life, he essentially wiped the slate clean. He couldn't just suddenly dig up those exact same acts of past cruelty and try to use them as a weapon to get legal relief. His own everyday actions completely neutralized his legal argument. All right, let's pivot to the broader legal rules here. Here is Part 3 of the case,
important principles. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it breaks down the standard of proof. When you watch legal TV shows, you always hear that famous phrase, beyond a reasonable doubt. But the Supreme Court explicitly laid down that matrimonial offenses, like cruelty, they don't require that incredibly high criminal standard. Instead, they belong over in the civil realm, which is governed by the preponderance of probabilities. That simply means asking, is it more likely than not that the cruelty occurred? Like, is it 51% likely? If yes, boom, the burden of proof is met. It makes it slightly easier to prove matrimonial cases than criminal ones. The court also took this opportunity to broadly define what cruelty actually means under the law. It's not just about physical violence. The court affirmed that mental cruelty is absolutely a valid ground for relief, and they defined it beautifully, really. It's any conduct that causes a reasonable apprehension in the mind of the spouse that living together would be harmful or injurious. It's a standard that's heavily focused on the psychological safety and well-being of the partner. So the crucial point is really this definition of condonation, because that's what became the deciding factor in the Dastane case. If the aggrieved spouse, the one who was wronged, forgives the conduct and just resumes normal marital life, the law steps in and says, okay, that earlier cruelty is now treated as condoned. You can't just hold on to it as a sort of reserve parachute to pull later on. Resuming a normal life literally acts as a legal reset button for the marriage. This principle is so important, it bears repeating. It really highlights that the justice system highly values the continuation of marriage and this whole concept of moving forward. If you choose to stay, and if you choose to act like everything is normal, well, the law assumes you've forgiven the past. It strictly prevents a spouse from holding past mistakes over their partner's head indefinitely, all while still enjoying the benefits of married life. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating question to ponder. We so often think of the law as this abstract thing that just happens inside a courtroom with judges and lawyers. But Dastane v. Dastane, it shows us that the law is actually happening right in our living rooms, in our daily routines, and in our everyday choices. If normal behavior equals legal forgiveness, how might your everyday actions be interpreted if they were suddenly placed under a legal microscope? It really makes you think about the immense weight of the simple things we do every single day. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Dastane v. Dastane. I hope you found it as intriguing as I did. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer. Hey everyone, and